Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Community Platform. I'm Anjum Anwar, and Community Platform, of course, is only found on uctv.co.uk. Before I introduce my guest today, I'd like to thank our sponsors: First Stop Vehicle Solutions, SG9 Security, Company for Sale.co.uk, First Qibla Tours, Brown Hill Corporate Hire, Longridge Coaches Executive Travel. And before I introduce our two guests, I'd just like to say that the topic today it's a painful topic. It's about the plight of Muslims in India and in Kashmir. And there's some very difficult questions that we need to unpick. The silence of Muslim leadership. Almost silence. Why? There have been demonstrations in India from all communities, but what we have not seen is the Muslims' leadership coming up with a plan, because there are approximately, I believe, let me just check, there are approximately 201 million Muslims in India. Kashmir has been under lockdown since 8th of August 2019. But we have not been able to, as a total Muslim community, we have not been able to respond. And these are the questions that I would like my guest to unpick. I'm going to start off with Adnan Khan, and we're going to be shortly joining by Mazhar Khan. And let's see where this conversation goes. Assalamu alaikum, Adnan. Good to have you back. How are you feeling?
Alhamdulillah.
Yes, yeah. Good. I know I know that you're busy, very busy. But Adnan, India, where are we with India? All these Muslims in India, they've suffered. Many minorities are suffering. You've had lynching, rape, and yet I don't see a collective Muslim leadership to say, hold on, that's not acceptable.
You mean within India or?
But even outside. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I was watching an interview of a Pakistani leader who actually says he wasn't aware of what was happening in China, for instance. So I think there's conflict here, isn't there?
That pleading of ignorance probably isn't correct. But India's is a tragic story amongst many tragic stories across the globe right now, where you see the fruits of democracy and the fruits of an ignorant populace being given the right to determine who runs and leads their country, and all of their basest instincts being given political power by appealing to those racist, xenophobic, prejudicial, bigoted positions that people probably carry within all societies, but Hindutva extremism seems to be a particularly malignant and a particularly vile strain of it. And the latest manifestation of that is the crackdown and the open hostility through legislation against a population who, you like to say, are in excess of 200 million. And you are beginning to see the formation of some kind of a collective response, which, funnily enough, is not collective in the sense that it is united in its foundational ideology, but it's collective in the sense that there is a raw outpouring of emotion and anger, which feels like the initial uncontrolled reaction of everybody who feels like they are being targeted by what they would term their own country, and what they have termed their own country for the past 70 plus years. So you see Indian Muslims and Indian Muslim leadership being opposed to these measures, but it feels as if it requires almost no intellect and no bravery to do that, because it's a natural reaction and they would have no option but to react to it in this way. But you've seen their cowardice on issue upon issue, decade after decade, on issues concerning Muslims within India and within India's surrounding areas. So it's no surprise to me that it's taken something so drastic to be directly against them before they have spoken out or felt that they have no option but to speak out.
So is democracy just a veneer? Because now I'm thinking, is democracy not working then in this area?
Democracy,
did it ever work?
I think that we keep coming to these probably coming into these questions from the wrong angle. Democracy is supposed to work like this. And it works like this the world over. It elects Trump, it elects Boris Johnson, it elects the guy's names escape me, the Brazilian president. It elects the president Duterte in Philippines. It elects the Hungarian leaders. It elects Benjamin Netanyahu. It elects your Modis. It elects disgusting, vile creatures because they happen to be the ones who appeal to people's deeply held, ignorant views, which do not require justification, do not require education, do not require qualification. All you need to know is I dislike someone else because they are the other, and someone who is prepared to take that narrative and run with it seems to be quite a successful merchant in the business of democracy currently. But this isn't, I don't want this to turn into a theorizing on democracy per se, but democracy gave you Hitler, and democracy has given you hundreds of extremely vile people as leaders of societies for centuries. The original proponents of democracy, as far back as ancient Greece, wrote about the inherent dangers of democracy in this unrestricted form. La Repubblica, one of the foundational documents for the concept and philosophy of democracy, goes into quite a lengthy critique of why democracy as a system is broken, where you take an ignorant, uneducated individual from the street and give him the same voting power as a well-reasoned, well-knowledgeable philosopher, as it was in them societies. And I don't know what proportion of your audience here may or may not understand Urdu, but you certainly will. We have Allama Iqbal, as we term him, the philosopher and poet, in what was United India at the time. And there's a short 2 couplets from him where he says, "Ik marde farang ne kiya mujh pe raaz ye fash, agarche ke dana yun kiya nahi karte." So an Englishman told me something of a secret, although the wise do not usually disclose these things. जमहूरियत वो तर्ज हुकूमत है जिसमें मर्दों को गिना करते हैं, तोला नहीं करते. Jamhuriyat, democracy, is the system in which you count people, you don't weigh them, you don't weigh their intellect, their capabilities, their views. So no, it isn't broken, it isn't doing, it isn't operating counter-intuitively, it is working as it is intended. and as it is supposed to.
Actually, अभी मैं ये सोच रही थी कि शायद तुमसे उर्दू ही में बात करूं, because this is a beautiful little verse. What we're going to do, we're just going to take a 30-35 second break here, and we will be back with you. Don't go away. Keep watching. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Community Platform on UCTV. And yes, we have our second guest who has arrived. So good to see you, Mazhar Bhai.
Assalamu alaikum.
It's been a long time.
I know.
It's been such a long time. You know, it's feel like old times again, and that's quite a few years ago.
Yeah.
16, 17, 18, 19, 4
Has
years
it been that
ago.
long?
Yeah, seems 4 years. And the topic is something that I think which is not only interesting for us as a Muslim, but we were just catching up on maybe democracy is dying in India.
Mm-hmm.
But then Adnan convinced me, no, not at all. Democracy is actually living up to what it believes in.
Depends how you wanna skin the cat, really, isn't it? You can look at it both ways, to be honest.
Yes, but it says it's actually living it up. Mazhar Bhai, I want to talk about India, and I want to look at the we said there are approximately 201 million Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them been been hurt. Some of them been raped. Some have been lynched.
Put that on. Screen, you got blue on.
Some of them been lynched. But
Put that on.
what we're saying is that we have not seen that kind of reaction from the Muslim leadership outside of India or even in India.
Uh-huh.
What do you say? Why do you think that we haven't had that kind of an uproar? I mean, you're talking about 201 million Muslims who have been cast aside.
Why should we be surprised? Because this is not the first disaster or calamity which has befallen the Ummah. We're having new ones perpetually over the last so many decades. Which country has ever responded for any of the issues that have affected Muslims?
The question is, Kashmir has been in lockdown since 8th of August. There has to be some reason why we have not been able to collectively to say this shouldn't be happening.
No, but it's happened at the level of the Muslim Ummah as a community. So people like yourself, myself, around the world have spoken about this, right? Yeah. Whenever something happens, Muslims speak up on behalf of the Muslims. However, the governments do not. They might give some lip service, but I think Imran Khan has rightly said when he was asked about the crisis in China, he basically said, "It's not my consent. I am the Prime Minister of Pakistan. The King of Saudi Arabia is the King of Saudi Arabians. The King of whichever country is their king. The President is their President. There is no leader of the Muslim Ummah. So any Muslim quote-unquote leader who speaks on behalf of any Muslim, it's for PR. No political actor in any Muslim country has ever acted on behalf of the Muslims or ever will act on behalf of the Muslims, because it's number one, that is not their remit, and number two, that is not their own vision, and the world community will never allow it. So I don't know why Muslims keep thinking that some prime minister, some president, some king is going to act on behalf of the Muslims. Palestine has been happening for over 70, even 100 years since the British colonized it. Kashmir has been happening for 70 years. We've got the Rohingya crisis. We've got the Uyghur crisis. We've got India happening now with the citizenship bill. There's crisis upon crisis upon crisis. And why do we keep looking to the so-called Muslim countries to act? They've never acted. They are never going to act. And we're going to have this discussion perpetually until we address the elephant in the room, that Muslims around the world are stateless. Whether you're a Pakistani, whether you're an Indian, whether you're a Palestinian, whether you're a Saudi Arabian, whatever you want to call them, you are stateless. We as Muslims don't have a state that represents us or looks after our affairs. And all these roads lead to the same issue time and time again. And this is the issue that circumstances will force the Muslims to address. If they don't willingly address this issue, and if they don't use their Islamic understanding or their political understanding to address this issue, circumstances will close all the doors and there will be only one door left. That what is the political destiny of the Muslim Ummah, and we will have to address that.
So you mean, are you saying to me, Mazhar Bhai, that Muslims have to suffer further before they wake up?
No, Muslims don't have to suffer at all. What I'm saying is, if we don't think for ourselves, circumstances will make us think. I.e., for example, if you look at the situation of the Muslims in India, they know Pakistan's not going to come to their rescue as it is today. They know that none of the Arab governments are going to come to their rescue. In fact, all the Arab governments have sided with Modi. So Muslims are realizing that who represents us, who looks after us, who takes care of our needs. And the answer to that is today, nobody. And that's what needs to be addressed.
So that's quite a bleak statement, isn't it? That nobody here is looking after the Muslim interest.
Well, it's not a bleak statement, it's the reality, and that's always been the case. So any of the issues which has afflicted the Muslim Ummah for the last so many years, in which incident has any country practically intervened and done something on behalf of the Muslims? I'm not talking about countries acting on behalf of the superpowers like Turkey has done in Syria and Iran has done in Syria, and all these actors, when they do go and do stuff in other countries, they will do it when they are given a very defined remit by superpowers. But none of them have acted purely on behalf of the Muslim Ummah. So for example, Saudi Arabia can go and bomb Yemen. Iran can come into Syria, but not one of them have fired a single bullet or taken a single act of defense or a material nature to defend the Muslims in Palestine.
Something very interesting you've said, Adnan. I want to pick up on that the Muslims of India know that nobody's going to come and help them. Is that the reason why the leadership within India, the Muslim leadership, have not spoken out as, vocally as they may have done? Because they fear, are they fearful?
Look, the problem is, if there's any kind of leadership in India for the Muslims, if they are linked to the political system there, their tongue has already been cut. They can only talk about Indian nationalism. They can only talk about Indian citizenship. That is a ephemeral concept, right? It's not a real thing, right? And people might think, what are you talking about? It's not a real thing. Of course it's a real thing. There is Indian citizenship. Well, hold on. Let's just go back to Indian history. Before the British Raj came there, we had the Mughal Empire, right? A Muslim rule of India. Before that, right? Before the Muslims even came there was no India. There were disparate Maharajas and kingships all over India. Ethnically, they are different. Religiously, they are different. Languages, they are different. The people from Tamil Nadu are more different to the Muslims in Gujarat, right, than maybe the Bengalis and the Pakistanis are. There's more in common with the Bengali and somebody in Yemen than there is between somebody in Tamil Nadu and somebody in Gujarat. They are very different. It's when the Muslims came, they made that into a unified political entity. So if you want to say who made India, well, you could say the Muslims made India as it's recognized today. When the British took over it and when they left it, they created this Indian identity, nationality, and they gave it to the Hindus. So there's no such thing as an Indian nationality because there is nothing in common with them other than the fact that they live in one border. Now, if it wasn't for the case of America propping up India and because of the geopolitical issues that have gone on, and I think it's not the remit of this discussion, India would have fallen apart a long time ago. There is nothing holding India together other than the fact that the international community wants to hold it together. They've got so many separatist movements there within India itself. So the thing is, what nationality are we calling for in India? It's not a real nationality.
So are we saying then the BJP's call and has been, flying on the concept of nationalism because it needed to unify.
Yes.
So that nationalism was needed
It's actually
to unify all of these differences. It couldn't have done it.
Religious nationalism.
Religious.
Religious fanaticism. So,
Explain.
without going into too detailed a history, because it's again quite boring for a conversation like this. The VHP, the Vishwa Hindu Priest, which is the forerunner to the BJP and still exists as an armed wing, as it were, has existed for a significant length of time for preservation and promotion of a Hindu identity. During the British Raj, they were actually implicated in the killing of Gandhi following the creation of an Indian state. But the real upsurge in BJP's popularity politically comes from just before the destruction of Babri Masjid.
Yes, that's pivotal, isn't it?
Yes, the starting of countrywide marches, the Mulak Gir Yatra, that eventually stops at Babri Masjid, where they claim is the birthplace, the Janam Bhumi of Ram.
Ram, yes.
The destruction of the masjid, and that which I tried to point to earlier, it suddenly brings out all of those either covered or well hidden bigoted, religiously prejudicial views that people had held for decades. So they weren't expressed as vociferously within the Indian political discourse, here and there, occasionally within regional politics, but you will see examples of it previously. Just to rewind for context, when Bangladesh and Pakistan become separate countries, obviously India played an active role. 90,000 Pakistani soldiers surrendered to the Indian army, and Indira Gandhi made a public platform statement where she said, "Today we have avenged 1,000 years of Muslim rule of India." So the idea that this is a new wave that started with Modi isn't true. BJP gained some prominence in the 90s, allows people who see them destroying a masjid to think, here's my racist friends who I can vote for. Obviously their vote share increases, seats increase. Vajpayee was their prime minister in the 90s.
Yes.
He may have been in a modern global sense a better statesman, a more diplomatic statesman, but he comes from the exact same political nucleus. He was replaced by Advani, who was a migrant from Sindh, where there are FIRs against him for plotting to kill Muslim leaders during the separation movement, including Jinnah, to this day, which was a topic that came up in conversation when he visited Pakistan, because if he went back to Pakistan,
Yes,
he was a
did.
fugitive.
Yeah.
So BJP has run on this issue of Muslim and Hindu separatism for the best part of 30 years now. Modi gained prominence, came to power, having already butchered Muslims in Gujarat in 2002. He goes back for a re-election and comes back with a landslide. So when we're speaking about whether democracy is working, yes, the people of India are mirrored in their majority in their government within that electoral system. So the vast majority of people's bigoted views are being pushed by the government narrative. So when you say, Muslims of India haven't spoken out, etc., what do you mean when you have tied your fate to a political system that delivers results like this? This is not the result of a corrupt election. Their fate, 200 million Muslims have managed to elect a handful of MPs because of the realities and the demography of India. Those people who are part of the political system or who believe this political system will give them deliverance cannot now turn around and say that a system put in place and working which elects a government who then chooses to legislate, that this legislation suddenly is anti-democratic. It isn't. It has a majority in the House. So what you've got to try and address now is, one, whether those people's ideological drive was correct in the first place. Obviously, I'd argue that it never was. It should never have been tied to this loose concept of nationalism that Mazza was pointing towards. And secondly, even you don't want to at this point, rub the faces of people who are suffering in that and say we told you so. But even at this late juncture, to realize that without Islamic foundations for your political work and without the concept of unity being paramount to Muslims, you will always continue to suffer these humiliations, no matter how much you try to stay silent or loyal. So if you stay silent through 70 years of oppression in Kashmir, if you stay silent or actually take the quote-unquote side of India when India and Pakistan go to an altercation, if you publicly, your religious scholars, and I'm not going to name people, but your most prominent scholars publicly make statements and declarations saying I'm a proud Indian and do not understand why that is Islamically problematic, then you've got to rewind and revise your entire political theory. That's where you are now. So there's no point stopping at the bottom end of a long series of events, which is just another symptom of the global Muslim lot, and saying, why has this happened to Muslims, pretending the past 70 years have evaporated into thin air, and what can Muslims do to get your Qibla correct? Your Tawbah requires you to actually backtrack, not start from here.
Yeah. I'm just wondering whether the people in India have actually realized that. I'm seriously wondering that.
Because I think from the beginning, right, I don't think Muslims in India, that's my heritage. I don't think Muslims in India have that mindset that we've sided with India against Pakistan. They have a very distinct identity. We are Muslims. Where they have been sold out is by their leadership and their ulama in some cases and some of their leaders. Because I want to come back to this point of citizenship, because the grassroots movements and demonstrations taking place in Islamic colleges in Delhi and places. What's their slogan? Their slogan is Tera Mera Rishta Kya La ilaha illallah.
Yeah, this is what I meant.
Congress doesn't like it, right?
Yes. No, they don't.
Because they say, no, we are Indian. They say, no, what is our bond?
Yes.
La ilaha illallah. And the people are very clear on that. That's our identity. And you can't now fool the Muslims and say, no, but you're Indian. Because you've never treated us that. We've never ever been accepted as whatever Indian means. In the same way as a Muslim in Britain is never ever a full-class British citizen. We've had British Muslims who have had their citizenship revoked. In America, Muslims have had their citizenship revoked. So it's no surprise that people in India are now realizing our citizenship doesn't mean anything, and the thing is, it should be no surprise. Because if we cast our minds back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this hit me just earlier today. Their citizenship was rock solid in Mecca because it was tribal. If you're with our tribe, you are right. You have the right to live in our Mecca or whatever, whichever place they lived in. And the slogan they had was, right or wrong, he's our man. So whether your tribal person was right or wrong, you had to defend them. And this was etched in stone. This was something fundamental to the tribal creed. Yet when Islam came, they broke this. They kicked Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba out of Mecca. They went back on their own beliefs. So if the Quraysh, who fundamentally believed in this concept of tribalism, turned their backs on the citizenship of the Muslims in Mecca, why are we surprised when India, Britain, America and any other nation now treats Muslims as second-class citizens? Only Islam gives you a guarantee of citizenship, not just to the Muslims, even to the non-Muslims. So you find that Islam has been in India for over 1,000 years. Yes. Right? Hindus are still there. Sikh are still there. Christians are still there. All the other people are still there. Within one rule of 2 terms of BJP, the existence of Muslims in India is being questioned.
And it's just not the Muslim, is it? Because when you see that the churches have been...
Correct. Yeah, not
so
just... Yes.
The difference with that though, the difference why I focus one rather selfishly on Muslims, just for clarity, when I was referring to Muslims of India, I was referring to the people who were speaking of, because I was discussing political allegiances, political systems and political theory. So I wasn't speaking about the average guy on the street. we are speaking about the so-called political leaders who've either set up small little regional parties or tied their lot with Congress all these 70 years. And so you sink or swim with that system. Those people are in no position to speak out. So even when they do speak out, they can only speak from that secular framework which they're fully bought into. So they can only come out with this idea of Indianness because they cannot speak about the concept of Islam which they sold for 70 years. So that was a slightly different issue. But when you're referring to the
churches,
the churches and the other minorities, the rife religious prejudice and hatred attacks everyone who it sees as the other. That is true. But those other people, others, haven't yet, they may eventually end up being the next victims, they haven't yet been subjected to government sanctioned, legislated discrimination. So they haven't been made second-class citizens by law. They've suffered atrocities at the hands of individuals and mobs, and the government has turned a blind eye because the people carrying out that violence have been their ideological bed partners or members of their own party. That's happened to Muslims too. But this goes a step further, or a few steps further, where you legislate through your houses of parliament to make a specific group, a group 200 million strong, the largest minority in your country, a minority bigger than the population of the vast majority of the world's countries, to officially make them second-class citizens and have less rights. This kind of stuff happened in places like Palestine previously. But these people feel emboldened. You hear the general of the Indian army speaking of setting up these re-education camps in Kashmir.
China.
Because they've seen China faces no repercussions. And the people, the hypocrites who would be up in arms were it one of their so-called enemies doing it, they will not, they'll stay silent. They'll have their tacit support. So you feel, you can see these people completely come out of the woodwork, and be less and less diplomatic about their intentions, be very upfront about wanting to set up things which would be considered anathema to a modern society a mere 10 years ago. So this is a new level of degradation and a new level of oppression on Muslims because of the language from government. So not individuals, not just ministers, etc. The government legislating against them and saying things like, well, Pakistan and Afghanistan and Bangladesh should be taking the Muslims, meaning you have less rights. So that's for the refugees. And setting up registers so as to be able to exclude specific groups, which will include non-Muslims too, but primarily Muslims. And that's a lived experience in Assam. 1.9 million Muslims are in camps there. So we're not theorizing based on some hypothesis. This is a lived reality. They've taken the Assam experiment, clearly think it's a successful one, and they want to roll it across the country. This is a new level of vile behavior from people at Modi, which is expected, but tragic all the same.
But just to add to that, we talk about Muslims being second-class citizens in like India and other places. But you know what? If we actually scrutinize the Muslims in the Muslim country themselves, they're not protected either. So you've got people like in Pakistan, for example, Pakistani government over the past 2 decades have quite comfortably lifted their own citizens off the streets.
Yes, of course they
and
have.
Imprisoned them or handed them to America.
Yeah, of course they have.
But
but the reverse is not the case. So when an American commits a crime, not just in Pakistan, the American government will come to their aid, right or wrong. And I'm not saying we behave like that, right or wrong, but the point is they take their responsibility of their citizens seriously. Look here in Britain now, where that boy was killed by the woman,
driver.
Right? She sneaked out of the country, right? And she didn't want to face the law because she probably thinks she's guilty.
She's immune.
Yeah. But America says, we're not going to send her back. It's irrelevant whether it's right or wrong. They said, we're not going to send her back. Now, that's the kind of seriousness they take their citizens' responsibility. They look after them, right or wrong. I'm not saying we behave like that, right? We behave with justice. But the point is, Our governments in our countries don't even have that responsibility to their own citizen. That's how far we've fallen. That it's not just the case that if you're a Muslim in India, your rights are not protected. If you are a Muslim and you stand up for the truth in Pakistan, your rights are not protected because your own government.
Because we've seen that, isn't it? If I can just bring in Dr. Butt,
Yep.
Yeah.
right, who is disappeared. We don't know where he is. Somebody knows, but I'm sorry. It just clicked here that you're absolutely right. We've seen Dr. Fir Siddiqui happen. We saw Mozambique.
May I disagree slightly?
Yeah.
May I disagree slightly?
Please do.
While staying on this side of the fence still. Far be it for me to defend this kind of criminal activity from Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, the Middle East. There's a running tragic joke for anybody who visits and stays any length of time, that the Mahabra are everywhere. So you're spies and you can't say anything about the government, and you can't. I have a very dear friend who you're familiar with, who lives out in the Middle East, and I can't ring him on WhatsApp,
No.
right, because of certain things.
Yes.
Right. So the control around people is. I agree with you both 100%, and it's disgusting and heinous. But
I knew there was a but at
there's a distinction I'd make, and the distinction is this. The criminal governments to which you point behave in that criminal manner for certain politically twisted reasons, because they don't want people speaking the truth, etc. But I would still make a distinction between that and literally disenfranchising someone for merely being Muslim.
Yes.
In Pakistan, you are not disenfranchised for being Muslim, for dressing like a Muslim, for praying in a certain way. There are certain political aspects of Islam which are part and parcel of the Islamic ideology, and Islam is incomplete without them. I'm in agreement with Mazhar on that. But those political issues, they will take issue with you on. But you are not lynched in the street for having beef. That's a new level of oppression.
No, you can. That's fine, but the point here is when push comes to shove, whether you're in India, whether you're in London, whether you're in Karachi, the point is no one's got your back. No one's got your back. So Pakistan has got no problems, sending its army to go and bomb and slaughter the Muslims in Afghanistan. It's got no problem sending its army, killing its own people in the northwest frontier, right? So they're slaughtering. So it might be for different issues, but the point is, our political destiny is not in our hands. Our political authority is not in our hands. That's the crux of the problem. Whether you are living in a Muslim country or a non-Muslim country, the problem is we are either, you can look as orphans, or we are stateless. We don't have a protector. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ said, "Innama imam al-junnah," meaning only the imam. The Arabic language actually says only the imam is the shield. Meaning other than the imam, you have no protector. So you can look for protection with the United Nations, you can look for protections with some democratic government, with some tribal government, with whatever. That is not a protection for you. And Allah says only the Imam is your protector. And we've seen that now. Since the demise of the last Islamic rule in the Ottoman, who defended Palestine till almost the last day. Yeah? And even with that, Muslims in India had a dignity. Muslims around the world had a dignity because of that, to some extent. Once that's gone, we've got nothing.
The speed, we're born and brought up in an environment where the concept, the living embodiment of the concept, so physically far away and in such distant memory that these things seem slightly removed from our reality. But there's tiny little things, you can point to 100 different things, which were always the singular bricks upon which the foundations of your overall unity lay, because certain things were well established and known amongst the Muslims. There was something I was reading a while back somewhere. The Mamluks, when they ruled over India for a period of time, and following them, even Alauddin Khilji and these people, some of their coinage is still preserved to this day.
Yes.
It bears the Shahada and bears a pledge of allegiance to the Abbasi Khulafa. These people had never met each other. The Abbasi Khulafa exercised zero power over these rulers in the Delhi Sultanate, as it was called. For centuries, these people ruled over the landmass of India. But they knew it was an established thing that, you know, was common amongst the Muslims, that amongst the Muslims, leadership is one, and somebody else who happens to usurp or take over power or gain control of an area cannot claim imama and khilafah absolutely. So they can only hold that power as if it's been granted to them. The Mughal emperors, they were emperors, all of them, used to replace their fathers, sometimes killing their own siblings to come to power in the most vile of ways. But they used to then write to Istanbul and ask the Ottomans, is it okay if I ascend to the throne? Because that formality was still needed for Muslims to accept you as the ruler. It was a well-established principle for century upon century. The Abbasids had a direct, familial, blood-based war with the Umayyads. Removed them from power, took their khilafah, took their seat. The Umayyad heir to the throne ran away and went to what was Spain at the time, the Muslim Andalus. The Abbasids never managed to take over that piece of land. The Umayyads, who had lost their power, who had the so-called khilafah for 100 years, didn't go to Andalus and claim, I'm still the Khalif of the Muslims. So whilst he ruled a landmass, he continued to know khilafah amongst the Muslims, and the united centralized government is one, and the Abbasids have it. Even though they took it from us by force, by the sword, killed my family, removed us from power, they still got the khilafah. This was a very clear and completely unambiguous concept. But as far back as recently as 1924, this concept was a completely normal one amongst the Muslims. That united central focal point of Muslim theological political unity, the erosion of that it manifests itself in a variety of different symptoms, and we sit here talking about it. So we can talk about the fall of places like Palestine and Bangladesh becoming a separate state. If we keep it focused in that region, you can talk about Kashmir, you can talk about what's happening to Muslims in India, you can talk about the way Pakistan is managed, etc., etc., American control in Afghanistan, all of that stuff. Every single problem you point to will all basically draw back to the same starting point. All the rivers will flow from the same source. You'll see that these are all symptoms. The disease, the underlying problem is exactly the same. Until you are united, until you understand why it is that you suffer the indignity, the injustice and the oppression that you do, it will happen, unfortunately, ad infinitum. And unfortunately, it wasn't a bleak prediction. What Maza was saying earlier is circumstances force you into a corner. Oppression upon oppression upon oppression upon oppression eventually leaves you with no delusions to sell to yourself or the public that this democratic party and this system here and this nation state will eventually give us deliverance. It will not. You've seen the 57 Muslim countries continue to suffer in a variety of different ways, and yet none of them seems to have progressed any further along on that chain to becoming a self-sustaining, stable, independent, confident, globally powerful model. Why? Because you have the exact same problem everywhere. So we can have, I hope not, but we can have another show in 2 weeks, and astaghfirullah, we'll be talking about some other suffering that has befallen the Muslims, and we'll go through the same thread of events that will lead to it every time.
I want to be a little optimistic. I feel that maybe, just maybe, what is happening in India, what is happening in Kashmir, is this the beginning of something that may help us?
So I'm eternally optimistic.
Yes.
And I could go on to length why that is, but maybe for another time. But just to extend what Adnan is saying, since the demise of the Islamic rule, it's not just the case that the Muslims have been in a mess, the whole world's been in a mess, right? So we find that all the other systems and all the other forms of government and models which have taken place in the Muslim and the non-Muslim countries, they have not created stability or peace, right? For example, if you look at the countries we've been talking about, there's always a question of us and them about immigrants and natural people. The same debate rages in the West, and they've never been able to satisfy this. And every now and again, it flares up. So the Second World War, First World War. If you look at the Nazis, yeah, very intolerant. You had Mussolini, another fascist in Italy. RSS modeled themselves on that. So they are not able to look after other people equally. They failed, right? They've never done that. Okay, when the times are good, they think, oh, we've achieved it. But it's not when the times are good. It's when the times are bad, how do you behave? So look at America. When America was an extremely prosperous state, before the First World War, extremely prosperous state. When the Second World War happened, and Japan took part in the war, they interned all the Japanese. So
just for clarity, before let us carry on, before somebody doesn't understand what we talk about, concentration camps.
Yes,
they interned everybody who was Japanese American.
Yes, they did.
Americans who were of Japanese heritage were put in camps because they couldn't be trusted. Britain did the same to people of German heritage. Sorry, continue.
Whereas the Muslims, when in India, for 1,000 years, he rightly talks about the Delhi Sultanate. Since then to the end of the Mughal rule, we're talking about 1,000 years of Muslim rule, right? Hindus are still there. They weren't killed or put into concentration camps. We find that Palestine is a classic example. We give that example time and time again about Jews, Christians, Muslims. Islam accommodates Jews and Christians. We've got no problem with that. In fact, we give them a status called Ahl Dhimma. Not only that, Ahl al-Kitab. So they have a status and a security. And we know from our history, right from the beginning, and I think at the time of Umar radiallahu anh, when they took over parts of Syria, and at a time when they weren't able to defend the people of the book, they gave the jizya back. And it was unheard of. They thought the Romans never did this with us. When the Roman taxed us, they took the tax. But you're giving the tax back. And they said, look, the tax is taken on condition that we defend you. We are unable to defend you. We give it back. So we're giving it back? They made dua for the Muslim rulers.
Yeah.
That we pray by our Bible that you come back and rule us again. So we've got a very good track record of looking after non-Muslims, right? Forget ethnicity, non-Muslims, whatever ethnicity. We got the example of the Jews being accommodating to Turkey. We've got the example of sultans in Turkey giving food to the people in Ireland who've got nothing to do with them. So when it comes to humanitarian aspect, when it comes to ethnic aspect, when it comes to other religious minorities, whatever it is, we've been there, we've done it, we've got the t-shirt. You don't have to tell us what to do. You failed. You have not been able to do that in any of the models of government, whether the Eastern or Western, secular or atheistic or whatever they are. None of them have managed to accommodate people who've got a different worldview to them, whereas Islam has.
You know, I'm just sitting here, the three of us sitting here know what the problem is. We can see it. I can see it. You can see it. What is stopping 52 Muslim states seeing this?
Well,
it's a $6 million question.
Without making it overly religiously heavy, let's keep it quiet.
Let's make it religiously heavy.
Keep it simply as simple as possible. Knowing a solution isn't necessarily sufficient because it requires A, action. Well, let's start with A, intention, and B, action, and C, and probably the most important factor, the help and guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all of that. But the way in which you must understand the question, and this is why being in despair or being mayus is not acceptable, not in the vocabulary of Muslims, is that you are sent here for a limited time on this planet, and you are accountable for things that you do within your power. So whatever is within your power, and whatever is in mother's power, and whatever is in my power, ultimately the victory or the re-establishment of an Islamic position or the integrity and dignity of Muslims is in the hands of the creator of the heavens and the earth. So I'm not giving you a get out. I'm not trying to get out of your question. What I am trying to say is what that should make you do is focus on what it is that we as individuals and collectively ought to be doing, because that is what we are answerable for, and that is ultimately if we understand the Islamic position and we understand the Islamic theology on this, that is ultimately what leads to the Nasr of Allah and the victory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
I understand what you're saying. I'm going to come back to that, but there's a question that's come through, and the question to both of you, please do jump in. Is Narendra Modi applying the genocide model in Kashmir?
I'll take it first if you want.
Please do.
Yes, but I'll elaborate a little bit, because I suspect you didn't want the yes only. Yes, for two reasons. One, if you see the online chatter, the discussion, which the PR of the situation that's being managed, you will see people, obviously 99% of them of Indian descent, but they have some supporters in the West too, people who run with their narrative, talking about the suffering and displacement suffered by the Kashmiri Pandits, the Hindus of Kashmir. No one should be displaced from that land. Even the Pandits shouldn't have been. But that definitely in that scenario is not the greater tragedy. The subjugation of millions of people, 90% of whose population is Muslim, of a valley which is the most heavily militarized zone in the world for the past 25 years, where there are 700,000 Indian army stationed, is a direct indictment of the intentions of the Indian state. But let's move on to the current development of whether it's a genocidal step. The sole reason for the revocation of Article 370, which gave India a protected status, is to fuse Kashmir into India so as to treat it as another state. And what that does is it removes all restrictions which would allow a change in the demographics of Kashmir.
Yes.
People who are not Muslims can now move to the state, buy land, populate the place. And this isn't hypothetical fear-mongering. This isn't me sitting here.
From the Zionists.
We've learned it from the Zionists who gave us a disgusting plan yesterday, who told us you can have this mishmash of dots of what is Palestine as a new state that will have no real functions of a state. It will not control its defense. It will not control its airspace. It will have 40-mile long tunnels connecting one piece of its land to another. The illegal settlements will be part of Israel. Jerusalem will be part of Israel. But the vast majority of West Bank will be part of Israel. This new state you can have, and if you listen, and I've tried to listen quite carefully, if you listen to Jared Kushner, who is Trump's son-in-law and the guy who was given the job of coming up with the plan, he says quite proudly that we can sit here and talk about the theoretical realities that existed in 1967, or we can address the realities that exist now. The settlements are a ground reality. Israel's control of the vast majority of West Bank is a reality. The Israeli capital being Jerusalem is a reality, even though they only accepted this last year or the year before. I'm going to work with those ground realities. And obviously, because of the inherent bias and racism of their supporters and the West in general, obviously no one is going to call them out and say, you created these ground realities. You continue to allow the building of those illegal settlements. You moved your embassy to Jerusalem, and now you're telling us, as if these things were externally imposed on you, that they are immovable realities and Israel will not give up these negotiating positions. So we've seen this model at play. This is the exact thing that will take place, that is intended to take place in Kashmir over the next 15, 20, 30 years. You will see people moving there, buying land, setting up these settlements, changing the demographics of the place. And then even if eventually you get to a place where, although I've never subscribed to the idea and I don't agree with it anyway, but even if you got to the point where UN mandated plebiscite was held, you wouldn't be able to get Kashmir its self-determination, because now you've changed the whole look of the place. So yes, this is the textbook genocide model, displacing and disenfranchising a people. This is how you do it if you want to do something as disgusting and heinous as that.
Modi's already done it in Gujarat anyway. When it comes to genocide, he's been there, he's done it, he's got track record, he's got the history, he's got the experience, and he knows that he faced no backlash, because the Indian population is not going to hold him to account for that, and the international community didn't hold him to account. So he's emboldened him to do what he wants in Kashmir. And on top of that, he knows that the neighbouring states, your Pakistans and your Bangladeshis and your Irans and all your Arab countries, they know for a fact that they're all on the same side anyway when it comes to geopolitical agenda. So he knows he's got no opposition other than the public opinion of the Muslims. And this is what they're trying to batter down. But, you know, it's a case of, you know, coming to the realisation what we've already said, that we don't have an actor in the field to act on behalf of the Muslims. But what's happened now, I think, is things are becoming more and more clear. So, and I think I've got to salute Imran Khan for that, because he has now, yes, absolutely, he has now categorically shown any doubters. He's made the doubters into believers, like Mr. Klopp. He's made the doubters into believers, that anybody who doubted that, you know, maybe Pakistan, if you had a nice, good-looking leader who talked the talk, could make a change in Pakistan. Now they know you cannot do that. The system is fundamentally flawed. The whole thing needs to move. It's not a case of just changing one party for another party. It's not a case of changing one celebrity PM for another celebrity PM. The whole system needs to go. And I think Imran Khan has achieved that everybody now believes that there is no hope in this system. So I think if Imran Khan has achieved anything, it's that one thing, which is a big thing, that people have now lost complete faith in that system.
Yeah, you know, I was watching the news, Pakistani news, I can't remember which one, but it is just that I think I was half watching, and somebody said, we have to change the system. And I suddenly looked up thinking, yes, I'm hearing it. So, and this is what I meant. Do you think that we are moving in that direction? I think we've got another question. What can the Ummah in UK realistically do for Kashmir? We
sit in a place where a lot of the intellectual and political inspiration for the Muslim world comes from, including Kashmir. And as individuals, or even as organizations, the least you should be doing is carrying the da'wah of Islam, which is educating and culturing the minds of not just the average Joe on the street, which is part of our Islamic duty, but also those who hold massive sway over political opinion and expression across the Muslim world. Because these people, their intellectual bases and their economic futures are so inherently tied to the West that everything Western is good to them. So Muslims living in and experiencing the West and all its so-called luxuries ought to be the forerunners of this discussion. They ought to be the people who are the loudest on this concept. They should be holding the incompetent and corrupt leaders to account, but for Kashmir specifically, they should be pushing, should be culturing the narrative and opinion that is favourable to Kashmir and its Muslim populace. All of its populace, but obviously it's a 90% Muslim populated area. So that Muslim nations, as they currently stand, even in their ridiculously weak position, should have no option but to stand for and with the Muslims of Kashmir. But the problem is that that's a duty that I think we should be fulfilling without despair. I have zero hope in any of these leaders taking practical action.
And this is what worries me, you see.
Any of these leaders taking practical action because they're, like I already said, their political destinies are so intrinsically tied to Western slavery and subjugation that they dare not fiddle with the model. So it might be a bit of a circular answer, but as individuals, I think our duties, our religious duties, to speak out, to educate, to push the cause of Kashmiri Muslims at every platform, via protests, via the media, whoever you can reach within reason, but at the same time realize why it is that we're so impotent in the situation, that we can practically do nothing to change their lot. The vehicle that is missing, that ought to be the primary focus of your drive, as with every other manifestation of this disease and every other symptom, Kashmir should be one of the more stark ones, because this it irks me somewhat when we speak of Kashmir being in lockdown for this number of days. It isn't. Kashmir, the valley of Kashmir, has been under brutal occupation for 72, 73 years. Yes. Consistently and directly. And like I said, the most militarized zone in the world. The reason why Muslims have not been able to do anything about it is because those who we keep repeatedly entrusting with our nationalist interests, or which they're not even very good at looking after those, but those who we keep entrusting with them are not endowed with the ability to do anything to change Kashmir's situation, and they're most certainly not endowed with the intention to do anything about it.
Last week I was talking to some scholars, religious scholars, and I posed the same question. उनका जवाब मैं उर्दू में बताऊं जी. उनका जवाब एक था कि देखें, अल्लाह ताला आपसे ये पूछेगा कि आपने क्या किया, वो आपके बारे में ये नहीं पूछेगा कि उन्होंने क्या किया. So I was left with this here, that as an individual, I'm only as an individual. I don't have a collective backup. भाई आप अपनी नमाजें पढ़ें, आप अपने रोज़ा रखें, आप अपनी फैमिली की देखभाल करें. That's all you can do. You are not responsible for anyone else. And it left me quite distressed that there's nothing that I can do to move this forward. I can't go and help people in Kashmir. I can't go and help people in Palestine. I can't go and help people in India. मुझसे ये the advice was आप अपने घर बार को देखें, full stop.
Okay. I could speak at length of
this. No, but this was the advice, and I was left. I came back thinking, I can't do anything. There's nothing I can do.
Alhamdulillah, not all ulama are like that, but the majority are.
I'm just telling you of an incident that happened.
The majority are, and they are that kind of mentality is that what creates apathy and a defeatist mentality, that what can we do, right? And this is a cancer and it needs to be nipped in the bud. But alhamdulillah, when it comes to issues and things need to move, Muslims generally don't look towards the ulama because they know they are not the leaders, they're not the movers. They'll go to other entities, and unfortunately, maybe right ones or wrong ones. But this thing about you just look after yourself,
yes,
and that's all that matters. That is condemned in the Quran. That is condemned in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Tawbah verse 24, they said, قُلْ إِنْ كَانَ آبَاؤُكُمْ وَأَبْنَاؤُكُمْ وَإِخْوَانُكُمْ, and it goes on, your fathers, your children, your family, your houses, the businesses, all of this is good in Islam. Your fathers, yes, we have to respect them. Your children, yes, we have to look after them. Yeah, houses, yes, we need to provide houses. Your businesses, of course, we need to work and provide rizq. All of this Islam tells you to do. None of this is haram. Some of this is obliged upon you. But Allah says, if this is more important to you than Allah, His Rasul, and struggling for the cause of Islam, then wait for Allah's judgment. And Allah does not guide the fasiq. So if you are only concerned about yourself and your family, Allah rather than struggling for Islam, then Allah's implying that you are a fasiq. So what these Imams are saying, forget Kashmir, forget Palestine, forget struggling for the cause of Islam, forget struggling for Khilafah, forget struggling for the betterment of the Muslim people. You just worry about yourself. He is asking us to be a fasiq. He's telling us to do directly opposite of what Allah has commanded in Surah Tawbah. So that is a nonsensical, it's not even an Islamic mentality. Islam has never ever been about myself. Islam has always been for the other person. If you are kind to other people and if you look after other people, that for you on the day of judgment is going to be more than if you didn't care about anybody, only concerned about yourself. And I'm not belittling your ibadah, of course, that's wajib, it's fard upon you to do, but not ignoring the world. Not ignoring.
A balance.
It's not just the balance. It's not just the balance. Allah has mandated responsibilities in different issues. You cannot balance. You have to take the balance Allah gives you. So if Allah says struggling for the cause of Islam is greater than this, then we have to take that. And we know for a fact that for 13 years in Mecca, the Muslims struggled for Islam. There was no 5 times namaz. There was no Hajj. There was no zakat. There was no Ramzan. There was no fasting for 30 days. So how is it they achieved the tarbiyah? How is it they looked after themselves? What is it that made them into these giants, what we call the Sahaba? It's struggling. That all they did day and night was struggle for the cause of Islam. That's what made them into people. Now what we are being told is, don't bother with struggling for Islam, just pray. Well, what's the point of praying? It's like saying to somebody, go to the gym, make yourself hench. What am I going to do with that? Oh, nothing. Become hench and do nothing. Well, why do you want to build your iman? Why do you want to read Quran? Why do you want to get close to Allah? For what? And do nothing? This life is the life of struggle. Allah created us to be in a to struggle and strive for the akhirah. This is not like sitting at the bus stop waiting for the bus to take us to Jannah. This is the examination room. This is where we struggle for the cause of Islam. And in the akhirah, if we have passed the test, then Allah will reward us. But some of us are now giving the impression that don't worry about anything. You're here just to pass the time until you go to Jannah. I'm sorry, that's not the case.
Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas. You are the best nation ever sent forward to mankind. Why? 3 limbs to the test. Ta'muruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhauna 'anil munkar wa tu'minuna billah. You enjoin what is good, you forbid that which is evil, and you believe, you have iman in Allah. This monastic, this monk-like Islam is not Islam. And I'll try and keep it light. I won't venture into areas you don't want me to. But it has nothing to do with Islam. It's an alien concept to the Islamic creed. The idea that you should worry about yourself. But the irony of this, again, like we're speaking about concepts which were known, everybody knew about them until about 100 years ago, and their erosion and their watering down because of loss of a focal, united political point. This is another symptom. The worst of the Muslims, the worst amongst the Ummah, through the 13 centuries, did not advocate this idiocy. And these people, because you said that the advice was in Urdu, so I'm going to go ahead and quite safely assume that they're from the subcontinent somewhere. Right?
I'm not telling you.
Right. It's a relatively safe assumption. Hajjaj bin Yusuf is one of the worst people to have ruled or governed amongst the Islamic dynasties over those 13 centuries. Hajjaj bin Yusuf was the governor at the time when a ship full of Muslims, merely a shipful, a merchant shipful, was abducted by someone in what is modern day Karachi. And had he focused on himself, these people would not be Muslim and they would not be lecturing on Islam and keeping it to yourself. So the irony is lost on these people. Had the da'wah not been carried by one individual, by many different methods, Islam would have not reached these people thousands of miles away in modern day India. They wouldn't have seen the hidayah of the Quran had people kept it to themselves. So when they say this and they say it with a straight face, you have to be either incredibly ignorant or incredibly stupid or incredibly badly intentioned.
The problem is, look, people are looking at Islam from a secular mindset, and they interpret Islam from a secular mindset. And I'm talking about some of our learned people, and that's all they see. They don't understand that even if you just wanted to practice Islam as an individual, you cannot. Full stop. You just cannot do it. So for example, the institution of zakat, you can't establish that as an individual. Baytul Mal, you can't institute that as an individual. Just yesterday we were having a discussion about one hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, well known. When he went to the marketplace and he went to one merchant and he put his hand in the dates and he pulled out, he goes, why is it wet at the bottom? He goes, oh, the rain made it wet. Rasulullah said, ordered him, put the wet at the top. Right? He goes, we do not cheat. Now, can I go into Sainsbury's or Tesco's and account them for doing something, or I said, fix it now? If I read the hadith, this is what it's telling me. I can now go into anybody and say, you correct that right now. But what they miss is, yes, that is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, but it's not for any Tom, Dick and Harry to do. He was authorized. And what that did, Umar bin al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he was a Khalifa, he appointed a judge of Hisbah who was a woman, to do this job. He gave her the authority to fulfill this. So the thing is, there are so many parts of Islam you as an individual cannot do. You need authority. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said through his messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, if you see a munkar, change it with your hand. If not, with your tongue. If not, hate it in your heart. The first port of call is change it with your hand, meaning if you've got the authority, meaning Islam needs to be in authority. If Islam is not in authority, most of your Islam becomes impractical, and then you have this secular mentality. Just pray, just fast, forget everything else. We've lost it, forget it.
And the vast majority of these,
go on.
The vast majority of the people from the subcontinent.
I usually have the last word.
The vast majority of the people from the subcontinent are Hanafis, right? There is a well-established opinion in the Hanafi school, in the Hanafi fiqh. There is no Jum'ah without the establishment of a united political entity amongst the Muslims. So you can keep your Islam to yourself, but you've got a problem that your Islam, by definition, something that was sent as a societal guidance, is incomplete if you try to minimize it to the ritualistic nature of Christianity or any of the other religions. Let's keep it to Islam. I won't comment on others. But when you try to go into that regression where you try to simplify it down for either your own lack of understanding or from a point of cowardice, then what you do is you do a disservice to Islam. You accepting that you are either powerless or do not fully understand what it is that Muslims ought to do is at least a slightly more understandable stance. But to give an indictment as clear cut and as definite as what you said, and this isn't about the individual, this is what the vast majority of people do say. You try to discuss the problems of the Ummah and they'll tell you everything that's wrong with you first. And the thing that they don't understand is that as an individual, there is no level upon which you can reach and say, okay, perfected, 100% completed this part, let's move on to phase B. No one's ever moved on to phase B.
I know what I'm going to do, Adnan. I tell you what I'm going to do. And I'm going to invite a couple of these scholars and I'm going to have you here. And we're going to have a lovely discussion. I'm afraid we're going to have to end it here. I'm very grateful to you, both of you, and I know that you're very busy guys. Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair for watching, and we have not resolved the problem of Kashmir nor of India or anything else. But what we have done in our very small capacity is to highlight the issue but also a way forward. And I think that way forward needs further discussion. And I'm sure that both you, Mazhar Bhai, and you and Adnan will one day return quickly to look at some of the solutions and a way forward. And just to conclude, that please follow our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can be notified of our streaming uploads. I'll see you next week. Until then, look after yourself and your neighbor, whoever they may be. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much, guys. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. you.